I believe I have touched on Anton Chekhov's play The Seagull before, but I want to get into it just in a little bit more detail. Because a lot of its themes, including symbolism, are very much related to a lot of the sort of the bigger sort of cultural issues that I've been discussing in my past few videos. And one example is, as I mentioned earlier, the symbolism of the playwright Constantine, who is a young, aspiring writer in the story who has many rivals because he's living in basically the shadow, under the glorious fame of this kind of shallow, narcissistic mother named Arkadina. And he's not a particularly talented writer either. His mother mocks the play that he doesn't even really get through the whole thing. He can't even show the whole thing because his mother keeps interrupting. But it's a play that I don't think he even gives it a title. I don't know, but it's about this great spirit, this amorphous thing. You don't really know what it is. It's made up of all these different spirits of the world: Napoleon, Shakespeare, all these great. It's like a laundry list of all the great men in history all put together. It's referred to as really the great soul of the world, and it's alone in this desolate planet. And then Satan comes along, which it refers to as the father of eternal matter. So it's super abstract, which is very characteristic of symbolism. It deals with personal spirituality. It's working very much against realism or impressionism. And throughout the play, his life continues to get worse because he's very much in a kind of rivalry with, or he's competing with, this other writer named Trigorin, who's a much older, more mature kind of writer, who writes just about, pretty much about anything, but on a less metaphysical, but in a more realistic kind of sense. But he doesn't have the same kind of pretensions as Constantine does. He enjoys what he does. It becomes arguably a bit of an addiction, very intense addiction actually. But nonetheless, he's good-natured about it. He doesn't take himself too seriously, whereas Constantine does, and eventually Constantine ends up committing suicide at the end because of unrequited love, that he loves Nina, the actress who plays the great spirit in his play at the beginning, but she loves Trigorin, and this to him signifies his own lack of self-worth, his own inadequacy in the eyes of the public, in the eyes of the artistic kind of community. So I guess what this points to is like two different things. I think that the thing, even though we instinctually as an audience we might want to root for the underdog, there are some things about Constantine that admittedly really do get under our skin, which do seem a bit hypocritical, which is that there's like a trace of sort of intellectual elitism in his work, and that would not be typical of an avant-garde type of playwright. We would think intellectual elitism would be the last thing that they would be capable of, because we think of avant-gardism as being part of a more bohemian kind of community, and intellectual elitism is we associate with the establishment, with the norm, the more mainstream kind of sometimes more provincial attitudes. But indeed, that Constantine actually has much more in common with them than we think. And as an example, his mother, Arkadina, at some point, I think after she watches his play, refers to his play as old-fashioned nastiness. And really is pointing out how plays should be written in his eyes, and showing it through this kind of semi-biblical and almost like end times, but kind of much more how to describe it, much more morbid depiction of a very strange future. But his approach is like, what is intellectually elitist about his approach is that he feels that art is not really meant to be enjoyed, that it's only meant to make people think. And that is very typical of the ilk, the class of people who would look down on art that whose primary value is entertainment. As if entertainment or joy as if it's not possible for those things to edify us as well. As if there's no, it can't have any kind of deeper meaning, it can't have any deeper spiritual value. That he's not aware that what he's doing is very much off the shelf. He's basically imitating many of the sort of the Gothic writers, and claiming that it's this new vision, this new form of theater that is going to eradicate all the different cliches that we see in the theater. Whereas in reality, he's just, as I explained, he's just promoting a new form of elitism. But he can't, and I think it's that streak of hypocrisy in him that makes it so that we feel sorry for him, but we also hate him at the same time. Because he doesn't really embody many of the things that he truly seems to stand for or represent, which is it. And there's actually a very crucial quote at the beginning of the play where he says that art should not be within art, life should not be portrayed as it is, but as it should be, as it appears in dreams. And the kind of story, and I think I've touched on this before, I think the kind of story that you would expect from a playwright like that is more like a story. Think of some examples, like Les Choristes, a French movie about this teacher that inspires and uplifts his students in this very harsh boarding school, and teaches them to think outside the box and be creative, be free. And shoot for the stars, and all these different cliches, different things we hear. That's the kind of story we expect from a playwright who believes in that. But in reality, the story actually takes a much darker turn than what we would anticipate. That he shows you a much darker side of somebody who might indeed be a proponent of the kind of humanism, the kind of idealism that should be encouraged in art, to try to uplift humanity, that should not, that we shouldn't really be too stuck in the ordinary, the mundane, all of the things that I've talked about before. But in reality, he ends up becoming a cliche by himself. You can get the sense at a certain point that he's just trying to bring in the money by simulating sort of a combination of medieval morality and including his depiction of Satan in the play, and also this intense longing, this kind of loneliness that he feels, that he's just basically spewing out and projecting into his writing, as if it's some kind of journal that he's been scribbling in, and now he's just like plastering it all over the walls and showing the public, hey everybody, this is who I am. So that's one of the things I think that's very disturbing about it, because I think the whole role of, as he says, of portraying the life as it should be, is you kind of expect it to be more like Willy Wonka and his factory, and his chocolate factory, right? The sense that you're actually trying to enchant people. That's the whole point of art. It's a magic trick. But instead, his purpose becomes very self-absorbed instead. And that's really the biggest tragedy of the stories. You never get to see what he would have done if he had actually followed through on his own vision. But I think when it comes to the bigger cultural issues, he sort of embodies two different sides of the spectrum. The one that, as I explained, the humanism, the important things that have actually become lost in art, that in which some of the things that have made it either banal or really terrible. But he also shows you some of the dangers, like the pitfalls of people who, over time, they might become sellouts to what what the establishment wants. And so I think that's some of the, at least when it comes to my own work, those are some of the things that I'm always keeping in mind, is like how to create new forms, but do it in a way that is sincere, that is genuine.